And that was probably the hardest decision I've ever made. I cried a lot about that decision, but if I had continued on that route, it would have been in viticulture. If you're buying a $60 bottle of wine, I think you should go to the farmer's market and you should find a local purveyor. If you're buying a local $60 bottle of wine, this is definitely true. Like, go to the farmer's market, talk to them about produce, talk to them about, because that's what's making the wine in the bottle worth what it is. That and the location that it came from and how much you have to pay for wine production in the US.
I think Portland and the Pacific Northwest, we should be like branding ourselves more as like Pinot Noir goes with hazelnuts and truffles and mushrooms and like the salmon and,
yeah,
you know, like highlighting those beautiful things. Samantha Cole Johnson is the senior US editor for Jancis Robinson, where she both contributes articles and hosts the Jancis Robinson podcast. Sam is a certified sommelier and soon to be master of wine through the Wine Spirits Educational Trust. Her writing has appeared in 750 Daily, Wine Spirits, Guild Somm, and more. Samantha Cole Johnson. Is it Sam or Samantha?
I go by Sam.
Sam? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for being here. We always like to do an icebreaker by having the guest pick a wine that maybe has a fun story or a personal connection. And so you wanted to talk about lingua franca.
Could you?
Yeah. What is it about this wine that is special for you?
So this wine, not this vintage, but lingua franca is the reason that I still live in Portland, or that I came back to living in Portland, because I worked my first vintage with them in 2018. And it was, before that, I had thought that perhaps I'd move, perhaps I'd go back to Colorado, which is where I spent most of my, was where I spent all of college and all of high school. And I felt like that was home. And I was like, maybe I'll go back and I'll go open an approved program provider for WSET. But before I go, I have to work a vintage, because otherwise I'm going to be teaching about viticulture and vinification. I just won't know anything. So I'm going to go work a vintage. I ended up at Lingua Franca and I never moved. And then I worked 4 more vintages. So,
And then you what?
I worked 4 more vintages after that. And I did leave to work a couple of those, but the experience in 2018 was so incredible that I could not leave. I went to work at Canard after that, and as much as I loved working for Andy and meeting Ben, and that restaurant is incredible, as much as I loved that team, within months of coming on board, by February, I was calling Thomas, who is the winemaker for Lingua Franca, and I was like, please, can I come back? It's like, most incredible team, most incredible experience, so much fun. It's like summer camp for wine nerds. And they would open incredible wines every lunch, and everybody was really hungry for information and super supportive. And I couldn't have asked for a better first vintage.
How involved or interested were you in like the viticulture, or pardon me, like the farming side versus the winemaking side?
That didn't happen till later.
Okay.
At first, it was just the winemaking, the team, meeting people, drinking incredible wine, learning how things were done. And then I went from Lingua Franca, I worked another vintage in Oregon, I went to Australia, ended up in Napa for 2 vintages. And the second vintage, I worked at Harlan Promontory in Bond. And they do vintage a bit differently, where they won't let you just work vintage and go into the cellar. You have to do the vit side. That's required.
Do the which? Oh, the vit side.
Vit side. It's like viticulture is at the heart of what everyone is doing, but a lot of times for a vintage casual or an intern, like, you show up as fruit is coming in, and if you go out and sample, that's extra. And if you get to like know the properties a little bit, that's extra. But at Harlan Promontory and Bond, that is the experience. by the time you go into the winery, you know every block that fruit would come from. You know what the soil looks like there. You know if there was an irrigation line broken there. You know who tends that block, what the pruning is like, why the clusters look like that, what rootstock it's on. And that's super important to them. And it became far more important to me while I was working there. And then coming out of that, I was offered the position. I was offered to move back to the Pacific Northwest and cover the Pacific Northwest for JancisRobinson.com. I was also asked if I'd like to stay on at Promontory. And that was probably the hardest decision I've ever made. I cried a lot about that decision, but if I had continued on that route, it would have been in viticulture.
It's really nice to hear. I mean, I visited Harlan once way back in the day, back when I probably didn't appreciate how cool it was to get to go there. And it was through the door of Mascot, because I worked with those wines in Los Angeles and Will invited us up there. But I just remember being so kind of awed by that property and how magnificent. And, it's like one of the iconic cult wines of California. But I feel like sometimes those cult wine brands can get lumped into just like high score, don't care about, like this reputation of kind of like these bougie wines that aren't necessarily what I would associate with like responsible farming or closeness to the land. So that's really nice to hear.
I think that it would be true of some other cult wine brands, but I can say with absolute certainty that Screaming Eagle, Harlan, Promontory, Bond are 100% like they care. I don't want to say more than anyone, but they care as much as anyone about how they're farming. That's at the heart of what they're doing. They've got it down to Harlan, Promontory, and Bond have a program called the Vine Master Program, where they have about 2 acres per person, and they train. So they have their crew, and their crew goes around and leaf pulls or fixes irrigation line. But as they go through, they are given the option to have more education and to advance to a vine master position. And when you become a vine master, you have your own 2 acres and you are given the ability to make decisions about that. Before you are allowed to do that, you have to align with company philosophy that says you're not going to use any chemicals. You're not going to try and, in essence, you will fight powdery mildew with sulfur. You will leaf pull. You will hedge or clip, depending on what you want to do. But you're not going to make the decision to use fertigation. You're not going to make the decision to spray with chemicals, but you're given free rein on other things as long as you talk to the person who's coordinating all of the vine masters and what they are all doing.
That's fascinating. I've never heard about a system like that because, I think of a vineyard. Why I asked the viticulture question earlier about lingua franca is I associate Mimi Castile with that project. And especially this is the Hopewell vineyard. I'm more familiar with having these one person kind of like gurus of viticulture that we all look to. But I love hearing this model of almost a co-op system. And I don't know if there's a right or a wrong, but that's just a cool way to do it.
No, but I think that it gives you, pruning decisions are so important. And if the same person's making the pruning decision every year, then the only person they have to blame if the pruning looks crap is themselves from last year. But you have that association with one person who becomes linked to a wine. And I think if we looked through and we looked at a lot of the cultier producers, it's about whoever the very charismatic, intense person behind that project is. And they're not the only one, obviously. Nobody's a one-man show. But they're what links you to it. And this project is it's like everybody's their own little vigneron. And the problem is, at the end, biggest problem is everybody's so proud of what is produced, and all the blocks are fermented separately and they taste their wine throughout. They come in to help with the process. So at the end, when the wine is made, they're like, well, why are we blending my block? It should stand alone. And you're like, no, the sum still needs to be greater than all of the parts. Like we are all still working together. But I think that's probably one of the bigger issues is people take so much pride in what they do at that point that it's hard to tell them that you're blending everything together.
I mean, I love hearing that. Yeah, I think that's really cool. I want to back up just a little bit and talk about why Oregon? And you kind of hit some of the key moments in your life that brought you here. But even backing up a little more, you were in Colorado. What brought you to wine? I think I heard that it was food and then maybe a totally different degree that brought you up here, but could you kind of fill in that timeline for us?
Yeah, moved around a lot as a kid, ended up in Colorado for high school and college. I desperately wanted to go to culinary school out of high school. My dad was not on board with that idea. That was probably a good idea. But he steered me very hard in the direction of business school. In state, he'd help with tuition. I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I ended up in business school. And then he passed away my freshman year. And then I was looking at financials and I was like, this makes way more sense to go through school faster and not have a part-time job because your living expenses are high. So I graduated in 3 years and desperately wanted to move somewhere else, but didn't want it to be that different from Boulder. And I was like, well, Portland sounds like it's got kind of the same culture. Moved out here for a job with Bob's Red Mill.
Oh, cool.
As a financial analyst. Within 8 months, I thought I was going to go jump off of one of our many bridges. And
just because you didn't love the cubicle, sit at a desk lifestyle?
I hated the cubicles. I hated the rain. I hated Portland. I didn't go out. I didn't make much money, so I couldn't even experience the restaurant scene. And I went back to restaurant floors, which is what I'd done in college. I saw I saw the movie Somm. I'm so cliche.
Yep.
And I thought, you can do that for a profession. So I went to get my certification. I went through the intro and
For the Court of Master Sommeliers.
The Court of Master Sommeliers. Went through the intro, thought I could pass certified just on a whim. Just by the seat of my pants. Could not, failed service. Went back to service, passed my certified exam. And by that time, I'd found a tasting group. I'd actually found a couple tasting groups, but my favorite one was led by a woman called Kim Oshiro. Maybe you met her.
Did she used to make the bottle thief attachment?
She still makes the bottle thief.
She's in Napa now, right?
Yeah, so you can have a tank of argon.
We've been using that for 8 years.
It's excellent.
We're an early adopter of the bottle thief.
I have a tank of argon in my living room, which probably shouldn't be there, but
one of my front porch.
She's great. So she was hosting a tasting group, joined her tasting group. She got me through the certified exam, and then she grabbed me and she was like, this is great and all, but there's a lot problematic in this educational institution. And a lot has changed. I think it's changed massively, but at the time, it was very problematic.
Yep.
And she's like, why don't you go the Wine and Spirits Education Trust route? Like, do WSET. So I picked up WSET, went through 3 and diploma, and got done with diploma in 2019. You asked how I got into wine, though. I'm like,
well, this is it. Yeah,
huge chunk of the story. When I went back to service, I was already on the wine route, but you asked me which wines I would want to bring, and one of the ones I mentioned was Soder Origin Series for EML Carlton, and that was because while I was working the floor at Red Star Tavern, which is since closed. James Cahill came in with the Soder Origin Series, and he did a lineup for us on the floor. I wish that producers would go into more restaurants because it is so incredibly impactful. He did a lineup for us. He poured us all the Soder wines. We already sold a lot of Soder, but I think we sold so much Soder after that. And he was asking us about sub-AVAs in Willamette Valley, and I was the only one who was interested in wine. And so I raised my hand, And I think it was only 6 at the time. Now we have way more sub-AVAs, but I missed Yamhill Carlton.
Mm-hmm.
And when he left, he gave me an unopened bottle of the Yamhill Carlton Soda Origin series. And he was like, keep studying. We need more people like you. Wow. And I was like, this is incredible. I love this. That was so nice. And then I went home and I kept studying and kept going to tasting group. And it was really impactful. So that set me off on a route. Kim Oshiro's tasting group set me off on a route. And then in 2019, I finished my WSET diploma. I was working harvests. I submitted JancisRobinson.com has a wine writing competition every year.
Oh, cool.
We just finished this year's. And my piece was shortlisted. It was a travel piece about Portland. Half the restaurants I have in there are closed now.
Oh.
But I desperately needs updating. But I submitted that, and then it was shortlisted, and then I immediately emailed and was like, you haven't done a harvest journal since Richard Hemming did one 11 years ago. Can I do one?
Wow.
And I got an email back from her that said, yes, here's what I need from you. Here's what you need to do. Here's your deadline. It must be in by this point. And then I did 2 more harvest journals. And then when I was at Harlan, I could not talk about that production process in depth.
Like NDA status type of thing?
More or less, yes.
Yeah. That's part of being a cult brand. Like a lot of it stays in the shadows.
Yes, that is your process. So couldn't talk about production in that level of depth. And instead started writing about viticulture and labor. And from there picked up more pieces and regenerative agriculture. And then from there, I started picking up more pieces. And at the end of 2021, I was offered the Pacific Northwest.
Wow. So at what point did you think, okay, writing is going to be my niche within the wine world? Like, was that, because one of my favorite things about the world of wine is that there's so many roles that one can play within it, from vineyard manager to winemaker to rep to, rep for a portfolio, importing, serving, somming, writing. And it sounds like, food was your first love, and then wine, it kind of transitioned into wine. And at what point did you say, oh, I would love to do writing within that?
I think I'm still not convinced of that. I actually don't like writing very much.
This is what every writer says.
I don't actually enjoy. I really enjoy having written.
Yes.
The process of writing is incredibly painful.
Yes.
And you will absolutely get people jumping down your throat about every little thing. But it's more about having a voice. And I don't think that, I love education. I love teaching. I teach WSET 3 every week. And writing is an extension of that. It just gives me a broader audience to tell people what I know about, which I think everybody likes to do. And you all of a sudden have this gorgeous platform to do it. So I love that part. I actually think that part is fading a little bit. We have a lot less people reading, and it might change. It might be that it is podcasts or video. It's going a lot more that way. If you can make short form video, that's the thing that's trending. That's what people are consuming in their moments between when they're working and when they're going to the gym and when they're eating dinner with their family. So
I'm curious why, and I don't want to make this podcast about Jancis Robinson, but I also can't not ask about her, because she's arguably one of the biggest deal women in the world of wine, especially in the world of wine writing or wine reviewing. And, you said you kind of pitched yourself to her. Did you always was there something about her and what she did that drew you to her?
I mean, you already said it. She is the largest woman wine writer deal in the world of wine. The Oxford Companion to Wine, the World Atlas of Wine, like the books that I was using to study for diploma.
Which we should have these on the table, yes. acknowledge that.
The 5th edition was just released. Like, you should really get it. Yeah. But yeah, she was massively inspirational, and her team is small. It's still really small. There are 6 of us.
It's internationally?
Yeah.
How many of those are women? I'm curious.
5.
Wow.
Yeah.
What does it feel like as a woman working for her? Like, is that something she intentionally kind of curates, or just?
Absolutely.
Really?
Yeah. But also, when you see, as a woman in the wine industry who wants to write, Julie Harding did this, Tam Curran did this. They both approached her. I was like, hey, I really want to work for you, which is the same thing I did. I'm like, hey, really would love to work for you. Tara, our managing editor, is a little bit of a different story because she came by way of Wine and Spirits, and we definitely went after her. But the rest of us are there because we went to Jancis and we're like, we want to work for you.
How does it, and maybe you don't have necessarily a lot of other touch points, but maybe it's a conversation you've had with some of your colleagues. Does it feel different working for her than maybe for other more male-led positions in the wine industry? I'm always curious how like badass women have like curated a work environment that feels empowering or feels special and different.
I don't know, because I've never written as a
on staff.
Full-time. There are 6 full-time people. Mm-hmm. There are 22 contributors that are regular contributors. We would not exist without them either. Mm-hmm. But I don't know how it would feel to be on a male-led publication, because I haven't been on one, and I've only freelanced for other publications a bit. And thinking about that, I'm like, have I freelanced with Wine and Spirits? I freelanced for one time. I wrote one piece with them before the magazine site shuttered. And Josh Green trained Tara, so she feels a lot like him in terms of editorial style. And he was a fantastic editor, super quick and super thoughtful. But I wasn't on his team, so I don't know what that would feel like. He was great to work with as an editor.
Yeah.
So is Julia, so is Tara, so is the rest of my team.
I guess here's another question, almost the same, but kind of shifting the lens. It's a two-parter. As like a young woman, I'll speak from my experience, like when I first became a somm, I was 25 and I immediately started running a wine program, and I felt like I had to prove myself. I felt like people would walk in and look right past me and look to any other male in the room. And maybe a lot of that was in my head, but I think a lot of it was actually happening. And I'm curious, like, did you notice that in your life starting out in wine in general? And did that change when suddenly you're like, I'm working for Jancis Robinson? Like, did people treat you differently?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
At the beginning of my career, I think it's just something that happens to young, hungry people. You want too much too fast. Mm-hmm. And very few people are willing to give you that. That is one of the reasons that I love Thomas at Lingua Franca. It's like he'd give you enough rope to hang yourself. And if you didn't, then he would give you more. Mm-hmm. But there are not a lot of people who are willing to hand out that much responsibility. Even if you don't want to pay raise, what you want is responsibility. And you want like praise, accolades. I feel like that's what you want when you're young. And education. But I had that experience in a number of positions where it was like I was just a cog and I wanted more, like I wanted to be more. And writing kind of inherently gives you that, because even if your colleagues, oh man, you definitely have to fight to prove yourself on the Jancis team. Like that's no different. Like I think that's everywhere. But I didn't ever feel like, nobody was ever looking past me, but just by way of having an audience, you are acknowledged. You are given some accolades. Mm-hmm. So it's, even if you get less from your coworkers, your colleague, you're not necessarily you don't need it as much. You don't need as many affirmations from your coworkers.
But I'm sure that has, I'm sure being on her team has opened a lot of doors now in terms of like the phone calls you can get, or the rooms you can walk into, or the appointments you can get, that kind of thing.
There have definitely been experiences where I have gone to visit producers or met people who have looked past me and now are in my inbox. And I think that that's not a bad thing. That's just life. And yes, I do give them the time of day, but I don't give them any more time than anyone else. Everybody is equally treated. I'm not going to make an appointment time for you if I wouldn't do it for someone else just because we've met before.
Yeah.
Come on.
Well, I want to shift gears just a little bit and talk about writing itself, because you talked about this a moment ago, but from what I've read of your writing, I'm always struck by how like human it feels and vulnerable. And I actually don't read that much wine writing because so much of it comes off as just sort of like this very polished, sterile wine descriptions without a ton of heart. And I'm always really struck by like the heart and the personality and the personal side that you bring into it. And I'm wondering, like, writing like that takes a lot of vulnerability and this sort of self-effacing thing that I think is always in there and I think resonates with people and makes wine feel very relatable. And that's one of my big problems with wine, is that it can come off as feeling pretentious or stuffy, or like, if you don't know, you're not invited. Has that always been inherent in your writing, or is that something that has been encouraged out of you?
No, I think that it was early on when I didn't know what I was doing. Like my early harvest journals, I think felt more like that, felt more like me. And then for a minute there was a hiccup where I got very uncomfortable because the idea of not knowing something and showing people that I didn't know something was really scary. And I think that is this whole industry is, well, I don't want to ask the question because then I look stupid. Meanwhile, you're sitting in a room full of 10 people and 8 of them don't know the answer to that question. And they're just hoping someone else will ask it. And if you do that in writing, it's like the wine world has this huge problem connecting to consumers because we're scared, so they're scared. Mm-hmm. But if you just can laugh at yourself, it makes it so much more approachable. And when you are taking exams, right now I'm in the process of the Master of Wine program. I've gotten through the first stage, but I'm having a really hard time with the tasting of the second stage. I've gotten through the theory part. It's a lot of writing. That is what I do. So the tasting...
Congratulations on being done with that part.
Thank you. But the tasting part, even though I taste a lot of wine, I don't taste, like I taste a lot of US wine. And so tasting the world of wine is a different thing. And I make a lot of mistakes. And I've failed this exam twice now. I will be retaking it for a third time next year. It's just very humbling. And to see the quality of people that you're studying with and the pass rates are so low. And we all came in as like straight A's. We're all coming from an overachiever background. Yep. And everybody's like, well, I can be the exception. Like I can be the 8% in the pass rate. And then you meet everyone and you're like, oh no, I'm going to have a hard time with this. Like I'm going to get the stuffing knocked out of myself and, or out of me. And it's just humbling. And you learn to laugh because otherwise you won't get back up and keep going. It's the people with the biggest egos who can't make it through the program because they can't stand to fail.
I just went back, and it's interesting you said, what you did earlier about the quartermaster sommeliers, because that was also my experience. And I did my first 2, levels 12 years ago or 11 years ago, something like that. And just this last summer, I decided I'll go back and do advanced just to see how it feels different. And to their credit, they're obviously very aware of like the error of their ways and now making a very concerted effort to change the tone in the room. But what I was struck by is that everyone shows up with their like, oh, I'm the I'm this and this position at this and this fancy restaurant. And you get very intimidated sitting around these tasting group tables because it's big lectures and then it's like 10 of you at a table. And everyone sits down like looking really confident, scared to show that they don't know. And I was struck by the fact that people were really good at what they regularly consume. You know, like, oh, I could nail Muscadet just from picking the glass up, whereas half the table couldn't do that, but I couldn't nail Côte d'Aron.
Yeah.
You know, and that we all feel very confident in the areas where we spend time in those arenas, but where we don't, what we're not drinking regularly, you're afraid to admit that you don't know it. Yeah.
And I think that, I don't know if I should say this one, but I think that there's a lot of people who are extremely motivated in the wine industry who take the academic part of it very seriously. I'm among them. But I think if you don't have an outlet and people don't give you those responsibilities and they don't give you accolades, it's really, what happens is a bit what's happened where wine seems snooty because people want so badly to share and they don't have the opportunity a lot of the time because sometimes people just want a glass of Rombauer. And if you are serving them, the correct answer is, yeah, I'm gonna go get you a glass of Rombauer. And you don't get to tell them about all the other wines from that area and what else in a similar profile would be so cool to drink that's owned by a smaller company, whatever it is. And so people feel more and more like they have to prove themselves. That's my impression, is like you get more and more like, I am worth something, my knowledge is worth something. And it absolutely is. It's just that not everyone is as interested in it. And you absolutely have to laugh at yourself and you have to find an outlet that makes you feel that sense of achievement and not the sense of, I must prove that I am good enough.
It's a really valid point. We see that at the restaurant a lot where people will, you can immediately tell when you approach a table, like, is this going to be a table that wants to talk about like the nerdy Jerome, you know, the Brett de Chardonnay done in amphora, or do they want the Rombauer?
Yeah.
And I think it is always this dance of being able to fill people out and figure out like how, but also like how excited you are about wine. That was one of the things I learned early on is like, if I'm excited about the wine and the story behind it, then that's going to like transpose onto whoever I'm talking to. Which is why I think writing, like the type of writing you do, is just, it's welcoming. You know, that's always what I'm struck by is like, it's engaging, it's personal, it's like, oh, here's like some of my own neuroses and like, here I am reaching for this bottle. Oh, and I love this bottle, let me tell you about it. You kind of said, oh, I hate writing, but how do you write for a living? Because I love writing, but I've never done it for a paycheck. And I get frustrated just when it comes to whatever you want to call it, writer's block, or just the need to like produce on a schedule. Do you struggle with writer's block or getting into a flow state? Or how have you prepared kind of rituals around having a creative pursuit as your bill paying device?
I do not write as much as a lot of people who work full-time for our site. Tam and Julia and Jancis all have me beat by miles. I do the social media side of our publication as well. I do some other things as well, but I absolutely struggle with that. I absolutely struggle with deadlines. I think every writer does, and it helps. One of the easier things is to write in that very cold, calculating, factual way, where you get people all of the information, but it's not necessarily personal. It doesn't have a story. And so it's not as, it appeals to those who already love wine and want just the facts, ma'am. That's what they're after. But it doesn't appeal to anyone new. So I am scheduled every week to produce the Wine News in 5. That's easy because that is just the facts. That is what happened this week in the world of wine that's worth talking about. Sometimes I can step away from the editorial side and say, this is my opinion, and I think whatever it is I think. But if I don't have a strong opinion, I can just report the news. The wine of the week, which I'm scheduled to do once a month, we all are, is leaps and bounds harder because it is, what is that storyline? What is that point of connection? What have we all done? Have we all sat on the counter in our kitchen eating greasy chicken? Probably. Like, can we connect on that? That's probably a good place to connect. But if you start in on this estate was founded in 1958 and da-da-da, you've lost people. It's just, there's nothing. It doesn't feel like their life. It doesn't feel like it has any relevance to it. So the way that I've kind of balanced it is every week, I am scheduled to do the news. That is factual. That is pretty quick to get out. Every week, I do all of our social media. Every month, I have a couple pieces scheduled, at least the wine of the week, probably tasting note reports, which easy enough. You can put the facts in the tasting note report. They're behind the paywall. You're not trying to grab new people and bring them in. The personal pieces are just dreadfully difficult. I don't know if I have any advice other than find the places to connect.
Yeah. Well, and you kind of touched on this, but wine, I've discovered, especially from a visual, like on social media or, I just think food, people love food television because it's like the food porn thing. Like, it's visual to look at, whereas like most wines kind of look the same. There's a red one and a white one and a pink one. And it is a challenge to translate like desire for that thing or excitement for that thing when you can't really visually stimulate the viewer in that way.
Yeah.
Especially as we're moving into this more like video focused. But I think even with writing, like, is story your entry point? Like, how do you get people excited about wine with just words?
I think story is the entry point for the written part of it. I think that education can be the entry point if you're on video or audio, because you already, just by putting yourself in front of the camera and letting people see your face, there is a point of connection where it sucks, but like in some way, how you look, how you present, how friendly you are, gives them the point of connection where they're like, I'm willing to listen to this person, or I'm not willing to listen to them. I feel like we have something in common, or no, I don't, and I'm moving on. And then you can start in with education, and I think that's great fun. And oh man, with socials, it's like, if you can give people an infographic, that's just creme de la creme. Unfortunately, none of our team knows how to produce infographics. So I'm trying to figure that out. I'd love to produce a ton of those, but yeah, anyway, I'm like, story is the entry point for the word part if you want to capture new people. If you're just looking to produce a tasting note report that is factual, you don't necessarily need it if you're appealing to people who already love wine. You need new people. New blood is story.
And what about just writing? Has writing become your preferred medium? And do you ever write creatively for joy or for expression, or like do you get a chance to kind of like have your fun writing as opposed to just your work writing?
Oof.
And I guess the alternate question is there a different form of creative expression that you feel like?
I did a lot more fun writing in college, and I did fun writing before that. I used to write, fiction when I was younger, but in college I wrote have you ever read The Elephant Journal?
No.
Okay.
No.
They put all kinds of stuff on there. It's like what your tarot reading says about you. Also, what I was writing was, I was in a environmental economics class. And so it was like when you should change your light bulbs to LEDs and if the cost of LEDs at the time was worth it. I love the academic side with the practicality, and how I think another great point of entry is how relevant can you be to someone's life? Because if you're just on a wild goose chase after your own interests and you're never thinking about what anyone else would want to hear about or how it pertains to their life, they're not going to read what you put out. If you can give people a wine, a recipe, a shared experience, advice, love, then that piece is so much more likely to be read than, a deep dive into microbial soil activity, which I've definitely written. And that's for different publication, though.
That's such good advice.
That's in my notes right now.
No, that's such good advice, because I think, especially in wine, everything you just said about it feeling kind of difficult to access, if you don't have something that can actually make someone's life better or pique their interest, or that they can go experience themselves, you're just kind of like, okay, do I need to theoretically have this understanding of how microbial soil works?
Yeah.
Unless you're then like, go buy this wine, you're going to taste it in this bottle of 2016 Lingua Franca.
Yeah.
Or something, I've had so many people now reiterate this point that like wine to them is like a point of connection or a vessel of connection. What is wine kind of like at its core metaphorically to you at this point in your career?
I think that's true. And I think that every story that is an intro for a piece that is more personal, more human, is, it's shared. It's not me alone. I think that's the beauty of it. And Karen McNeil started the Come Over October movement. And
I don't know about this.
So it's a response to Sober October, and not saying, okay, alcohol is all bad, but like, maybe it's fine to have a glass of wine alone once in a while. If you want to have a glass of wine at the end of the day, that's fine. But like, in reality, at its core, that bottle is too big for one person. The way that we get through that bottle is, I have a glass, you have a glass. You take it maybe in and share it with people who work with you. And together we have a shared experience around this thing. Yeah. It's the most beautiful part of it. It's the thing that I think makes it different from, you can do shots with friends, sure, that's fun enough. But this is like, you're sitting around a table most of the time with food, most of the time with friends, hanging out, having a good time. It is enriching.
Did you grow up in a family with wine? Did your parents drink wine?
Not all that much. I remember very distinctly some things. My mother loved Rombauer and Mer Soleil, Chardonnay. Mm-hmm. My mom and my grandma loved those two wines when I was younger. Now they both like much different wines. They both only drink Pinot at this point. But they loved that. I thought that was just my mom. It turns out my dad was the one who was liked oaky, buttery Chardonnay. And I think it was because he liked whiskey, and that tastes like barrel at that point. Mm-hmm. And so he turned her onto it. But that was like occasionally in our fridge. That would be the wine. On New Year's, on Christmas, he would buy her a bottle of Dom Perignon, put it under the tree, and then we would open it on New Year's.
Oh, cool.
But and if we went out to a steakhouse, he would order a bottle of Chateauneuf du Pape. But that was it. It was like California Chardonnay, Chateauneuf du Pape, and Dom Perignon.
I mean, 2 out of 3, they're not bad.
Yeah, they appreciated it, but it was much more the experience around it and like what it meant for a meal. It was special if it was on the table.
Did your dad ever get to see you work into wine?
No. I wish he had. I really wonder what he would have thought. He thought it was such a bad idea for me to go into, like I said, he did not want me to go into culinary school. I don't know that he wanted me to end up in restaurants. At the same time, my grandma worked in catering on my mom's side. My mom can cook if she feels like it, but pretends she doesn't know how to cook most of the time. My dad cooked all the time. He was raised in his dad's ranch kitchen. They had 3 locations in Iowa. So it was
So restaurants were in your blood.
Restaurants were the back, and the thing that took up most of the time if you weren't at school or you weren't at work, everybody was in the kitchen. So I don't know how you can raise a child in the kitchen 80% of the time that they're awake at home and then expect them not to love the kitchen.
That's very sweet, though, Because I think anyone that's worked in, I'm like looking down the barrel of 20 years in restaurants. And if I had a kid, I can't say that I wouldn't be like, don't do restaurants. You know, it's tough. It's tough. And you like sacrifice a lot of the normalcy that you look around and that 9-to-5 life of like getting to spend evenings. Like it's taken almost 20 years for me to now be in a place where I can take evenings off and suddenly I don't have any friends who have the same schedule as me, you know? So I totally get your dad like wanting different for you.
Yeah. But then at the same time, loving that side of things so much that if you had a 9-to-5, or if you were able to work 9-to-5 in a restaurant, what's to say that you're not at home with your kid in the kitchen, making cookies, teaching them how to grill steak at like 7. I don't know why, but that's what they learn to love. That's when they spend time with you. So it would be very hard to not have that as a core memory.
Do you ever see yourself getting back to food, or where do you see food and wine intersect? Where does your excitement lie with that now?
Tam Curran, who is one of my colleagues, writes pairing pieces. Mm-hmm. And I'm not about to step on her toes, but oh my goodness, I love that side of things.
My favorite part of it.
Yeah. It's not because it's like, it's the sensory part, but to me, it's also the being able to talk about food, because I think we pay so much attention to this beverage. And this is how I got to caring. Wine is how I got to caring about viticulture, which is how I got to caring about agriculture in general. But if you're buying a $60 bottle of wine, I think you should go to the farmer's market and you should find a local purveyor. If you're buying a local $60 bottle of wine, this is definitely true. Like, go to the farmer's market, talk to them about produce, talk to them about, because that's what's making the wine in the bottle worth what it is. That and the location that it came from and how much you have to pay for wine production in the US. But it deserves to go with something that was farmed with that intention food-wise as well.
When you look at the iconic food and wine pairings in the world, and it's that old adage of what goes together what grows together goes together.
Yeah.
And you know, you go to Provence and you're drinking Provençal rosé, and there's the herbe de Provence that is the seasoning on all the cuisine, and the olives, and like the eggplant, everything's coming from that area. And Italy, of course, does such a great job of that. But I think Portland and the Pacific Northwest, we should be like branding ourselves more as like, Pinot Noir goes with hazelnuts and truffles and mushrooms and like the salmon and, you know, like highlighting those beautiful things.
You can't, like, you can grow anything here.
Yeah.
But I think it's also really weird that when we think about in a global context, we eat so many of the same foods as everywhere else. Like, okay, yeah, we have mushrooms. We do a lot with mushrooms here because we have them. Salmon, yes. Hazelnuts, yes. But there are native plants here that we can eat that people ignore because they're scary. You would have to learn about them. It's not
like miner's lettuce. Like, give me some examples.
Yeah, miner's lettuce, salal berry.
Yeah.
All of the berries.
Even huckleberry that we don't see a lot of. Yeah.
Huckleberry, berry, whatever berries you want to talk about. I'm like, what else do I have for you?
Those are some good examples, yeah.
No, but there's so
stinging nettle.
Dandelion, stinging nettle.
Yeah.
Fern.
Yeah. Doug fir, like spruce tips and stuff, yeah.
Spruce tips. What did I go look at? Camas, but we probably shouldn't be eating that unless we are tending that.
Oh.
Yeah. I just went to a foraging class this past weekend. We have so many things that other places don't have that we should be using more of and tending more. And then we have in other places, that's the fun of going to visit, right? Or it should be, that you get to try things that you don't we have percebes here.
That are like a persimmon something?
No, percebes. Spain goes nuts over these. They look like little dragon knuckles.
The little red ones.
They're barnacles. They're like,
in the ocean. Yes, I've had those. They look like little like dinosaur feet, dinosaur toes.
They do. And so in Spain, this is like a delicacy. And here we pretty much ignore them. We have razor clams. There's so many pairing options, and there's so many wines in Oregon that are not Pinot Noir that would go with those things. Yeah. We've got bubbly, we've got mellow and growing, we've got what do you want? And then in addition, what other things grow here that we can make wine out of that aren't grapes that we can make frugal wine out of?
It's tough because I also love the idea of just like an Oregon-focused restaurant. And I think the sad truth is that it feels like a lot of the supply chains, like to source those ingredients on a regular, consistent basis are like not in place as of right now, which means it has to become this real labor of love of like sourcing those ingredients and then making it financially viable. And it's a bummer that should even be a piece in the puzzle, you know?
Well, also, I hate to say this, but eating in winter is just going to be less fun.
Yes.
Like if you had a restaurant that did that, which was just focused on...
Like why Favakin didn't necessarily stay around forever.
Yeah. You might just close because if you're going to try and do that in the winter, people are going to be like, oh no, we'll go back in the summer.
Yeah.
When ingredients are coming in, everything's fresh and brilliant. And you're like, well, in reality... It's more drab, but it is more how we should be eating in the winter. Things like potatoes, carrots, apples, whatever's in the root cellar, whatever plants are growing at this time of year. But yeah.
Do you ever see yourself getting into that world in some way? Or like of course you love what you're doing now, but do you have any like particular dreams or visions that you would love to try out in the future?
Yeah, I would love to write a book about I love looking at data. It's, and especially if you can put the data in an infographic. Wine Folly has proved that to all of us. Thank you, Madeline Puckett. You can give people those infographics. I would love to write a book that looked at what the food sources of an area traditionally were, which native plants you can eat, which plants, maybe they're invasive, but they grow in abundance and you can harvest them in abundance, are in that area. What the specialties are in terms of like seafood or what animals are raised there that do really well. And getting into, pork and beef and chicken as well. Mm-hmm. Pork and beef and chicken are kind of everywhere, and not everyone has a protected designation of origin for their cows or their chickens. Thanks, France. But looking at that and then looking at what is a traditional drink from that area and what is more modern drink. So Oregon, Pinot Noir. But what was growing here before that what was growing up in Washington, apples was just on the tip of my tongue, apparently. They produce so much fruit. And you're like, okay, well, who's making beverages that are maybe co-ferments that we could look at pairing with things as well? I'd love to write a book about that.
I would read that book.
It would be so much fun. The thing is, I've thought about it and I've been like, you would have to. The audience would be buying a book for the chapter on their home, or they would be buying the book to learn about wines that they could get internationally and then pairing them with things that weren't necessarily grown locally because they might have to go looking for things for that recipe too, which would make me sad if in essence, my fear is it appeals either just for a chapter and people are just reading that and then they're like, why did I buy a whole book for a chapter? Or they're looking through the whole thing and instead of being like, well, when I go there someday, I'll try that thing. They're like, I'm going to try and mash it all together with a bunch of imported things. Yeah. No, eat what's in your area and then like treasure the moments that you get to eat things that are not from your area, but don't make that the norm.
I wanted to ask you quickly about the wines, the Wine in Five, because you probably, arguably more than like anyone in the wine world right now, have a pulse on like exactly what is happening based on all the news stories, because that is your mission, is like, look at what's happening, pick the most relevant stuff and report on it every week. But I'm curious, do you see women's role in wine shifting in any noticeable way? Or have you kind of tracked data on that? Or do you have any observations on like what it means to be a woman in wine, whether it's a winemaker or a wine writer, based on the news stories you're seeing?
Oh, goodness. I think there are actually a good number of us who are wine writers. Like, I think that if you looked at data on who's writing about wine, it would probably be an even split. But I don't have any data that's hard data on that, so don't quote me. I think that brands are becoming more and more aware that they must cater to women, that women are a lot of the time the ones who are going out and making decisions on what is going to be drunk with dinner. I'm thinking of the Johnny Walker and the, what have they released? Jane Walker? Or no, they released like a woman-focused spirit. And I think just being more inclusive and elevating, like, you want to buy from, if you are into research and you're like, I would like to buy from women-owned or women-led wineries, and because I would like to support women in the wine industry, then you start looking and you're like, wow, there aren't as many as you would think. So you're limiting your choices. So I think what's important is that you're elevating women to leadership roles. And I think that's going to happen more over time. I also think that people are making much different decisions than was traditional. Like, a lot of people are choosing not to have children. It's just, it's a cost of living, but it's also the you can have it all mentality doesn't really bear out. Like, you're going, if you love your job, you could leave. But the thing, like, fundamentally your focus has been split a little bit, because all of a sudden something that seemed really important isn't going to seem as important to you. The thing that's going to seem important is your offspring, which should be the case. But I think it's changing. I think it's changing gradually. I think the way to fix it is to elevate women into leadership positions, and everybody wins.
And keep reporting on that.
Yeah.
Shining that light so that people know that that is the norm.
Yeah. This is also true of LGBTQ, BIPOC. Like, if you don't have someone, I remember having this conversation with someone where they were like, why should this organization be offering BIPOC scholarships? And I was like, well, because nobody currently wants to go into the field because there's no one at the top that looks like them. So it just seems like, why bother? Like, I'm not going to have any fun there. And this was just like, this person could not comprehend this mindset. I'm like, no, you're losing people. And then you're losing a whole consumer base too, because nobody knows how to talk to them.
Yep.
Because nobody's part of that demographic.
Yep.
So you all lose. It's like, financially you lose, and so much lost opportunity there. But luckily, that person wasn't in charge of laying out BIPOC scholarships. So
Great.
like, no. Or promoting people of color.
I have one final question for you, which is, what do you think and I ask everyone this, like, what do you think your superpower in life, career, everything you do is, and is it related to being a woman or not?
Oh, goodness. You ever read Ender's Game?
Embarrassingly, no. I feel like I've heard the gist of it, but I've never read it.
Yeah, he's like a very controversial person, but he's dead now, so you can read his books. I loved Ender's Game, and there's this thing that Orson Scott Card talks about called limbic resonance, and it's like, in essence, it's emotions catching. So you can tell if you walk into a room, and if someone's in a really not great place, you can feel that. And I do feel like most of the time, women are much better at that. And if you can feel someone's weird energy, then you have a lot better chance of setting them at ease or asking them questions that might reveal why that is, and then trying to help smooth that out or whatever it is. I think that, and being flexible, and that's not necessarily related to being a woman, but being able to be like, okay, well, I don't know what I'm doing. Also, I don't know what I'm doing. I think women are more likely to say that than men. I don't know what I'm doing and I need help. Yeah, men don't ask for directions. I mean, some of them do. I've slowly trained my partner to be like, you ask where the thing is in the grocery store. And he's like, no, I can't find it anywhere. And I'm like, you didn't ask.
Yep.
They probably have it in the back. Ask someone for help. Asking for help is my superpower.
I love that. It's a valuable one.
Yeah, I had to take a minute to get there, but that's my superpower.
Well, Sam, thank you so much for being on. This was, I could have talked to you for another 2 hours, but for the sake of everyone's calendar, for the rest of your day, and we didn't even taste this.
We didn't.
Now it's had an hour to open up. It's gorgeous.
This was also, you want to talk about Mimi. Mimi's incredible regenerative farming. This was only the second vintage of Lingua Franca. Things were a lot different. The winery wasn't even finished. It was beautiful.
I'm trying to get Mimi on the show sometime soon because, I'll talk about female icon. But
Oh, man.
thank you so much for being here. Cheers.
Thanks for having me.